Please welcome Carnegie Mellon University's 10th president, Dr. Farnam Jahanian.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is so good to be with you. I guess I should say good afternoon. It's a little past 4, but thank you all for joining us today for our final President's Lecture Series event of the year. As most of you know, the series brings a curated lineup of thought leaders and world leaders to campus with the goal of engaging and inspiring our community on issues of emerging and, of course, preeminent relevance to society. And I'm thrilled to be closing out this year's President's Lecture Series with John Wells. Who, as all of you know, is a successful writer, director, of course, Emmy Award-winning producer, but probably more important, a beloved member of CMU community. John, welcome back. We're so happy to have you back on campus. Along also today with us are members of our Board of Trustees, members of our university community, including academic and administrative leaders, as well as faculty, students, and staff. And I also wish to recognize and welcome leaders from across our Pittsburgh community who are with us this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to be really brief. We want to get to John, I know. But let me take a couple of moments to introduce our speaker, John Wells. John is a 1979 graduate of our drama school and the founder of John Wells Productions, a LA-based television production company. He's also an accomplished producer, director, with an impressive list of credits, including many hit TV shows. Let me try a few on you for fun. The West Wing, Shameless, Maid, ER, Third Watch, Animal Kingdom, and the list goes on. Many producers and directors would declare success with just one hit show at a time, but not John. In fact, there was a period in his career where he was executive producer for 3 primetime biggest hit series, all at the same time, simultaneously. But I have to tell you, John is very humble. He is quick to point out that each production, whether on the big screen or a small screen, is a team effort. And he's known for generously putting the spotlight on his crew all the time, every time. As you would expect, John is is in high demand in Hollywood these days, but he still makes trips back to Pittsburgh. In fact, we were talking about it a little bit earlier today, to give our students the gift of his time, attention, and expertise. In fact, since 2010, he has funded visiting professorships in directing and also endowed graduate fellowships in the School of Drama for the past 15 years. The John Wells Directing Fellowship is awarded to CMU students pursuing a 3-year MFA degree in directing and covers all tuition costs for their time in the program. These fellows have joined us this afternoon. If you're graduate students or undergraduate, John Wells Fellow, will you please stand to be recognized? All right. Thank you all for joining us. I am not exaggerating. John was just beaming a few minutes ago telling me how pleased he is with the quality of our students and how he's proud of all of you. John is a repeat guest artist in our School of Drama, I should say, meeting with our faculty and students every year when he comes back, including one-on-one sessions with our John Wells Fellows. In fact, he didn't arrive just for this event today. He's been here for a couple of days, and he's going to be here through Friday morning. We're truly grateful for his deep and meaningful engagement and investment in our programs and with our students. And we're thrilled that his newest show, The Pitt, and we'll talk a little bit about that, which is based right here in Pittsburgh, is a critical and commercial success. The Pitt has already been renewed for a 2nd season, and the 1st season finale actually airs tomorrow on Max. The show's creator, I should tell you, has called The Pitt a love letter to first responders, nurses, doctors, medics, techs, everyone who works in a hospital. Medical professionals, of course, are applauding the show for its accurate portrayal of working on a hospital's front lines. I know we're all waiting to hear from John, so without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to our guest of honor and distinguished lecturer, John Wells. Take it away, John.
Thank you all for coming. I need these, so forgive me. I want to talk about the value of narrative storytelling in polarized times. I tell stories for a living. My mother was a practical person, an English teacher, and she had another way of describing what I do. She referred to me as a professional liar. I actually think she meant it as a compliment. But there is a truth embedded in her characterization. The talented folks I work with spend our time dreaming up worlds and situations in the hope that our imaginings can move you to laugh or sometimes cry to feel something. Connection to theme or themes, we want to take you places you haven't been, to experience things you might not have experienced or hope to never have to experience in the case of the Pitt. To entertain you and educate, to reconnect you with the human experience in all its daily contradictions and foibles. The cliche, of course, is that all this began around the communal fire tens of thousands of years ago. Stories told and passed down to warn of dangers, stories told to educate and pass along communal wisdom. These stories became fairy tales, religions were painted on cave walls, embedded in our cultural norms and taboos. Transferred to the page when written language was created, then to Greek drama, religious parables, ritual, and ceremony. The stories we tell each other create our culture, our values, our perception of the world and those around us. Not long ago, before the advent of radio, films, and television, YouTube and social media, we received these stories through the written word. Books, newspapers, the very occasional play, a sermon at church or at a synagogue. And the stories came in at a reasoned pace, the pace of the written or spoken word, maybe an hour a day at most. With the arrival of radio, the pace of that information picked up. The stories became more available, supplementing the newspaper and the sermon. But still, at the most, a few hours a day. Movies that entered the culture and took 3 or 4 additional hours of our attention a week. The arrival of television and the mass acceptance of the box in our living rooms further crowded into our available time and soon demanded an average of 4 hours a day of our attention. And now, social media, television, YouTube, etc., occupy a whopping 9 hours a day of our attention. 9 hours of stories. YouTube videos are stories. TikToks are stories. They tell a tale. They're loaded with cues, cultural cues, visual cues, some overt, some subtle. They shape opinions, redefining what we naively used to think of as facts. Voices are raised, gauntlets have been thrown down, choose a side, nuance as a weakness, anger and frustration. A pandemic seriously challenged our sense of safety and made everyone face what we so often try to ignore, our mortality and our frailty. So in this overheated political and polarized environment, with so many insistent demands upon our attention, is nuanced narrative storytelling still possible? Can the center hold? What purpose does storytelling hold in this complicated time? Are we all relegated to only preaching to the choir, yelling into our own media echo chambers? I would argue strongly that these times require a return to the communal fire, that those of us who have the privilege of telling stories to audiences have an even greater responsibility to find the common strands in our humanity to amplify our stories, to normalize the others among us, to introduce our audiences to other points of view, not through diatribes or haranguing, pointing out as wrong with other points of view, but through emphasizing subtly what binds us together in our common experiences and our common fears. Whatever your feelings about the current administration, it's clear that we're going through an escalating assault on creative, legal, scientific, and academic freedom and thought. Attempts to curtail constitutionally protected protest and speech, threats to remove or withhold funding from academic institutions that include varying viewpoints on diversity and inclusion, threatening judicial action against perceived enemies in the legal profession, even wanting to eliminate or curtail academic study and the critical exploration of ideas. Threats to media companies, where I make my living, for their inclusion and diversity programs, for characters and stories that we are allowed to tell. You know, Bert and Ernie as part of an extreme homosexual agenda, etc. In all of this turmoil, what binds us? Our common humanity. When I was growing up in Colorado, I never saw an interracial couple holding hands or with their arms around each other in public. I never saw or knew of a female politician or CEO. As a teenager, first in the theater, I met gays and lesbians, but they never identified themselves as such. Arriving at CMU in the mid-70s, I had the good fortune to be befriended by many gay and lesbian students in the College of Fine Arts. They had a safe space with us in the CFA building. But any time we left campus together, they dressed differently, spoke differently, acted differently, and stayed close to those of us who look like we might hold up okay in a fight. They were woefully mistaken in that regard, I'd like to point out. Now we all regularly attend gay and lesbian weddings of colleagues and friends, elect gay and lesbian politicians. The CEO of the most valuable company in the world is openly gay. There are 14 gay or lesbian members of the Senate and Congress. Sarah McBride is a congresswoman, and yes, Mr. Chairman, congresswoman is the correct honorarium. Yeah, please, if you feel like it. We have gay and lesbian governors, fighter pilots, astronauts, professional athletes, hell, even NHL and Olympic hockey players. Over half of my staff are LGBTQIA+, and I didn't hire a single one of them because of it. I hired them because they're great at their jobs. Now, what changed, in no small part, during the 70s, All in the Family, MASH, Barney Miller, Bob Newhart, Family, Maud, and many other shows began regularly featuring LGBTQ characters. In the 80s, more and more supporting characters were gay or lesbian. Billy Crystal played a gay character in Soap. Tom Hanks won an Oscar for Philadelphia in 1992. Then in 1997, Ellen DeGeneres came out on her ABC sitcom. Was it easy? No. ABC ran a parental advisory at the top of every episode after that. Yeah, they did. And Ellen was canceled a few months later as skittish advertisers pulled their support. But within a few years, more than half of the shows on network television had regular gay characters and storylines. Will and Grace ran for 250 episodes, championed by an out gay president of NBC and no parental advisory running before each episode. And now Pose can win Golden Globes and Emmys and star the fantastic Billy Porter, CMU grad, drama grad 91, who credits his professors here as, quote, the angels in his life. Courageous activists marched in the streets demanding change. The AIDS epidemic, ACT UP, and Rock Hudson's death were all essential elements of this cultural change. But only one thing brought the basic humanity of LGBTQIA+ people into hundreds of millions of living rooms every night: television. And the stories we tell about our neighbors, our coworkers and friends, regular people who are just like us. Stories humanize those who seem different from us, that make choices that are different than ours. But once had been hidden is now accepted. For 10 years, beginning in the 1970s, the Jeffersons introduced American audiences to a wealthy black family. Ran for 253 episodes. They weren't drug dealers, murderers, or servants. They owned a dry cleaning business. Bill Cosby's show followed 10 years later. He was a doctor. His wife was a successful attorney. It was the #1 show on television for 6 years and averaged 350 million viewers a week. Beginning in 1994 on ER, we introduced a diverse staff of professionals, men and women, doctors, nurses, working together to save lives. We told their stories to a weekly audience of over 40 million viewers. The women doctors and the doctors of color we spoke to all over the country reported that within 24 months, patients no longer responded with surprise when they walked into an exam room. In 1985, women made up less than 20% of incoming medical school students. Last year, that percentage was over 55%. On West Wing, we elected a Hispanic man, Jimmy Smits, as president to follow Jed Bartlett 2 years before a black man, Barack Obama, won the White House. Bartlett had termed out under the 22nd Amendment, an amendment that I suggest some in Washington may need to brush up on pretty soon. But more seriously, what are our responsibilities to democracy and our communal culture as storytellers? Humanizing the other is a patriotic act. But in divisive times like these, when sides have been chosen and anyone who doesn't agree with you is seen to be your enemy, what is the best way to make sure your stories can be heard? I would argue it's by showing, not telling. Don't yell it from the mountaintops, whisper it in the ear, with a smile, with laughter, with shared tears. We all have the same desires and same fears. Change won't come from attacking someone else's beliefs by belittling their fears. To paraphrase an old Upton Sinclair quote, it's impossible to change an audience member's mind if they feel their deeply held beliefs are being belittled. I've been working with some friends on a new show for Max called The Pit. Thank you. It follows a long shift in a hospital modeled on Allegheny General on the north side. In an episode we did earlier this season, we met a beautiful young woman who works as a sommelier at an upscale restaurant. She has a nasty cut on her arm from a broken decanter. You come to see that she's trans, but that's not who she is, or only who she is. She's a lovely woman that has a cut on her arm. You'd be happy to see her serve you wine or sit next to her on a plane. She's just a human being. That's what I mean by whispering. No preaching to the choir, no big speech. She's normalized in the storytelling because she's profoundly normal. Someone you would be lucky to have as a friend or as a daughter. We recently have done, sorry, spoiler alert, a large story on the show, I'm going to just improv for a second, about a mass shooting and the aftermath of the mass shooting. At no point during the episodes that are involved with that does anyone ever speak about gun control. You don't have to. We're trying to show for those physicians who've dealt with it, and we did a lot of research with the people who had to deal with it in Las Vegas. They showed us a lot of their documentary footage that they had that they never released from the hospital. You take the message away that these things are not without costs. That's the subtle message. If you start with talking about gun control, you end up in an argument. But you can't argue with the fact that we ask many, many people professionally to handle the ramifications of some of our policies, agree with it or disagree with it. Progress can seem slow because we have our faces pressed up against the glass of now. But change doesn't move that way. It moves in years, in decades. I understand how frustrating that can be to those who feel confident in the certainty that they are right and that others are wrong. I too can find it frustrating. But change is real and it's constantly evolving. Tell your story, but tell it with empathy and compassion to those that don't yet understand. Tell it in a way that it can be heard. Tell the stories about our shared experiences, about our basic humanity. Walking around the campus the last few days, I saw an interracial couple kissing right out in the open, in love. Saw a lesbian couple holding hands, walking to their classes. I saw hundreds of students that I couldn't possibly begin to identify their race or ethnicity. Why would I even try? It doesn't matter. It didn't matter then either. The stories we tell can and will grease the slow wheels of change. 9 hours a day. That's the canvas you have available to tell your stories. For over 120 years, Carnegie Mellon has been committed to supporting the arts. It's an incredible legacy. Those quirky, noisy, overly emotional drama department kids and their compatriots in the College of Fine Arts you see around campus aren't engineers or scientists. They don't build things. But they can and will continue to change the culture that we all live in, that we swim in every day, and that has real value. Thank you, President Johanian, for your continued and unwavering support of all of us who tell stories for a living, and for everyone in the Carnegie Mellon community for giving us the freedom, the space to learn how to find our voices. Thank you.
John? That was magnificent. Thank you. Surprised me. First of all, thank you again for being here, and thank you for your remarks. You know, we've done a bunch of these over the last couple of years. I don't think I got as emotional as I did just a minute ago in any of the. They were all magnificent. They were all fabulous. But thank you for being so candid, and thank you for speaking from heart. We're going to come back and touch on some of the issues that you brought up, but I want to start with a little bit of a lighter note.
Please.
So I did, I did some research, and we found that our provost, Jim Garrett, is here, but he wasn't provost back then. We just found out that you overlapped a little bit at CMU together. But we found out that actually when you applied to CMU, you were waitlisted.
I was. I would have waitlisted me too. Just
Yeah. But then you were granted admission eventually a few weeks later before the school year. So
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks before I had to go.
2 weeks before. So it appears that you knew that you wanted to come to CMU more than we recognized initially. By the way, you did pretty well. So tell us about that period. What attracted you to CMU? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you ended up at CMU.
Yeah, I was born in Virginia and lived in West Virginia for a while. My father was an Episcopalian minister, and we moved to the Diocese of Colorado when I was in third grade. And so I think of myself as having grown up in Colorado. He had grown up in a farm in Ben's Run, big place, Ben Wells's place, in West Virginia off the Ohio River. And he was interested in always having a large vegetable garden, so we always lived out of town, which meant that I spent a lot of time with a lot of the ranch kids in what is now all, if anybody knows Denver, it's all like suburbs now, but it was Arapahoe County, which was there was one high school, and and I got interested in the theater because we were we built most of our houses. My mother was an English teacher, and we didn't, we weren't poor by any means, but we didn't have a lot of money. So we built our houses. They would pour a foundation, then we'd build them. So I had some tools, and some friends of mine who were in middle school doing a talent show asked me if I'd help them build a set because I had a hammer and a saw. And I kind of fell in love with all those crazy people and did it in high school. And my parents were very accommodating when I said I wanted to try to go to drama school, and said, why don't you work in the theater for a year, see if that's a real thing. It's, I think they were supportive, but hoped that I wouldn't think that it was a real thing after a year doing it. And so I worked in some dinner theater, and I worked that whole year and saved enough money to be able to come. But I was on a wait list, and I was actually set to go out with another dinner theater show, drive it down to Arizona, and I got a letter. It was still the time when you got a letter with your acceptance, and I threw everything into a trunk and came.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider not coming to CMU at that point?
Well, I was pretty sure they were considering me not coming. I don't know. I've come to understand that the admissions process is very complicated in the sense it's very hard to evaluate people, and the people that I came to school with all had far more significant experience already in the theater than I did. So I mostly decided I wanted to come to CMU because we had a guy who helped in the technical department at our high school, and I was saying I wanted to go to school somewhere, and where should I go? And he said, well, you'll never get into Carnegie Mellon, but you could try and go to CU. And that got me all fired up. And I applied the first time I didn't get in, I applied again, and I got waitlisted. So I figured maybe if one more year went by and I applied again, everybody would think I wanted to come enough, I'd get in.
Well, I know I speak on behalf of our entire community. We're glad you came to CMU, by the way. I want to pivot and talk a little bit about, by the way, you should know it's gotten much harder to get into CMU since those days.
Yeah, it wasn't, I got there and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So credit to our students, these brilliant students that are here. Let's pivot and talk a little bit about the John Wells directing program and fellowships that you funded at Carnegie Mellon. What inspired your decision to give back, and what's your assessment of the program and the talent that we have here as you've watched it over the past 15 years?
Well, the talent is still extraordinary. I mean, the class that I went through when I was here was Cherry Jones was a year ahead of me, and Holly Hunter was a year behind me, and Greg Lahane and a bunch of people that you know were the graduate directors when I was here. So there's extraordinary talent here already, and a lot of the professors were, directing things, all over the country. So that was always a big part of it. Definitely felt like the country boy when I came, there was no doubt. But I've told this story before, so for those of you who just bear with me who've heard it before, but I didn't really have enough money to come to school. So I had bought a truck when I was working in the theater just to kind of get around, and so I sold that, and that got me through kind of the first year. And I kind of faked my way with some loans and stuff through my sophomore year. And then my junior year, we didn't really have enough money for me to come back, but I came back anyway. I figured maybe nobody was paying attention. And about a month, it was worth a shot, right? I mean, I'd been up at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival making a whopping $75 a week, so I'd really put a lot away. So I came and I kind of just went to class and waited for somebody to say something, and eventually somebody did, and there was a wonderful professor who was the assistant head of the drama department at the time by the name of Bill Nelson. And he called me in, and we were all afraid of him. He had a very dour, I don't know if anybody here still knows who Bill Nelson was, but he was intimidating. And he came in and he said, "You got to pay your bill." And I said, "I can't pay my bill, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad I got some of this. I'll try and get some work, and then I'll come back." And he said, "Well, don't do anything. Don't leave yet." And then he called me back the next day and said that he had called one of a previous head of the department, never told me who, and they had paid my tuition. And I tried to say, like, well, what can I see? I'm still get emotional about it. I said, "What can I do to thank you letter?" I said, "They don't want the thank you letter. Just remember in the future that this is all about just,
Paying it forward,
passing it down." And so that was why. It was an easy decision for me when ER, I like to refer to ER as my ship came in. It did very well, and so there was, funding to do it. I'd stayed in contact with the department and asked. At the time, it was Elizabeth. I just said, "What do you guys need?" And she said, "The thing that would really help would be for this." So that's how it came about.
Well, that's first of all is an inspiring story, and I got to tell you that I know you've heard this from my colleagues, the current leadership and past leadership of the University and Department, how grateful we are for your support of our students and also your own time and commitment to the university. We really appreciate that.
I just point out to everybody over there, you got to do the same thing, right?
By the way, we're recording this, so yeah. So let's talk. Listen, we're going to be able to spend next 40 minutes or so, and we want to be able to get to some of the questions. By the way, you can pose your questions. You figured this out. You've done this before on Slido, and I'm going to ask Bethany to help me out with some of the questions. But let me talk a little bit about your most recent show and talk about some of your work. Your newest show, as we talked about, The Pitt, debuted in January, as I mentioned in my introduction. It's an overwhelming critical success, and by the way, congratulations. I want to read to you a couple of things that's been said about this. A physician quoted in the New York Times said that The Pitt marked the very first time she watched doctors on TV and could see herself on the screen. And when you hear people describing it, another example is growing, as I said, number of medical professionals are calling it the most accurate medical drama on television. And then there's entire conversations about how The Pitt is, and this is exactly the term people are using, competence porn. I had to go.
My mother would be so proud.
I know she would. I had to go to Google and figure out what this means, actually. I live a shelter life as a university president.
Don't do it on your university.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. This is actually, folks, this is a real term for people who are in my age group. It describes the pleasure you get from watching someone who does something really, really well. I love that. Actually, the term is so apt. So, how did this show come about? Let me start with that question, and then I'll have a couple of follow-ups for you.
I had done 3 shows that had a lot of medicine in it, so I've done about 500 episodes of medicine before, and neither Scott Gemmell nor I, who worked on ER together, wanted to do this again ever. Warner Brothers is always after us to try and do it again, and I would always say, no, I'm done. I've done enough. Noah Wiley, who plays Dr. Robbie on the show and was on ER, and all of us have stayed in touch with the ER. We used a number of physicians on set, in the writer's room, nurses. And so when the COVID epidemic started, they started reaching out to us to say, and particularly to Noah, saying, I am going back and trying to watch the ERs to remember why I should go to work. Like, it is horrific. I'm losing friends, colleagues. I'm pronouncing 3-4 people dead a day. I'm making decisions about life and death, who's going to get the respirators that we have, who's going to get the ECMO machines. And then Dr. Joe Sachs, who's our chief medical advisor, one of the writers, great writer and producer on the show, was at UCLA Trauma Center as an attending. And he started sending us pictures of him in the ward in his full suit. For those of you who've seen the show, there's scenes with Dr. Robbie Noah's character in the full PPE that was necessary to intubate. And those are based completely on the pictures that Dr. Joe was sending us from UCLA. So then they started to talk about, in the kind of the threads that we were on, about once we were out of COVID, in the sense that there were some vaccines and people were returning to work, they felt like everybody was forgetting. Now, that's a natural thing that we go through when we've been through a trauma. You try and distance yourself from that trauma. But he said it's not something that we can distance ourselves from. And there's tremendous PTSD in the community that had to deal with this, the medical community that had to deal with this. And we want somebody to tell our story before it's forgotten, because everybody wants to forget. And that's really where, that struck a chord, where he said, well, if we could do it without doing, and I love medical melodramas. I've written plenty of them, love in the, broom closet stuff. And, but I said we didn't want to do that. We wanted to just follow these. The initial idea was we wanted to do a drive along with emergency room physicians. Mm-hmm. And on streaming, we're able to actually show what they really go through, which is it is what they actually see. So we're really careful about the verisimilitude of what we're doing. And that, in Max, I'm not sure they knew exactly what they were in for. The first couple of times I saw some of our medical prosthetics, there was some concern. And there's, and it's dry. There's no music in the show. It's just the sounds of the ER. And so the most gratifying thing that I've heard is we've got a couple of emails from and texts from some of the people that we worked with before. And we have lots of doctors on the show now. We have 4 full-time physicians on the show, in between between the stage and the writer's room, and 9 practicing ER nurses who were on the set the whole time with us. But we got some emails, and one of them said that I now can show my wife what I do, because I could never explain it. Right, and that's
very powerful.
That's the stuff when you can do that and people feel seen. It was the same thing we got with West Wing, which was the staffers, or who we heard from more than anybody else. Like, now my parents know why I don't make nearly what I can make if I worked on Wall Street. So yeah, that's gratifying.
You cover a lot of very difficult subjects in this show, from drug abuse to abortion, and other very, very complex issues. How do you decide what to pack in a particular episode? And I'm going to come back to the difference between how this show is done with her versus others in a minute. But how do you decide because you end up, I have to say this, is that getting our attention. People are mesmerized by this show, but these are really, really hard subjects as well.
We're sort of like what I was trying to say in my little talk is we don't come at it like we're going to preach. And we've on a couple of subjects, I've been really tough on the writers, like, yeah, you went too far. You didn't present the other point of view. There is another point of view. We always have to be presenting the other point of view. But we have experts come in all the time and talk to us about different issues almost every day. And then we meet with nurses and ER physicians and say, what was your day? And just ask them to take, the average ER physician is required to see a patient every 4 minutes through a 12-hour shift. That's the load requirement now for physicians. So, people will say like, wow, no, that would never happen. Well, these are somebody, we've asked them to write down what they went through that day and give them to us. And we get them and we go through those stories and see which ones dovetail with other stories, and then we talk to the experts who are involved in it, in the subject. But the abortion story is an example of one that I thought we didn't fairly present both sides, and the woman whose daughter it was didn't really get a fair shot at explaining what her fears were. And, so we don't always do it great, but we're trying. We're trying to say, like, these are just people who have to deal with these issues on a daily basis. And we want to present the dilemmas that they go through. The ones that I think have been most effective, the trans woman and what we did with gun control, but also the end of life stories with making certain that you've got your living wills together and that you've really talked about your parents and what their wishes are and how you're going to handle it. And then what happens with fentanyl, which I wish I could tell you that there's a day in a major urban medical center where there aren't fentanyl deaths, brain deaths. Even when we were shooting at Allegheny General here in September, they were telling us how many they had that day. And we were in the parking lot getting ready to shoot something on the helipad, and a car pulled in and screeched to a halt, started screaming. And they came out and revived, one of the nurses came straight out and revived a young woman in the back of the car. Really nice car. Well-dressed woman. This wasn't like weren't picking people up off the street.
Wow. One thing about this show is that the way it stands apart from other shows is that how you tell the stories, and its format is real-time format. First of all, to some of our audience members who may not seen the show, tell what that is. And then if you can tell us, how did you actually land on this particular approach? And are there particular advantages to pursue this kind of approach?
Yeah, we wanted to present it. We wanted to present an accurate picture, as much as you can, because it's all, you're recreating something, so it's not real. There's a lot of artifice to it, but we were trying to get at what this day really looks like for a physician. So at the end of it, you feel as exhausted as they are. And so to do that, we had a lot of things to consider. And one of the things that I insisted on from the beginning is that we shoot each episode. Each episode is an hour of the shift, beginning at 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. and so forth. So it's told and shot completely in continuity. So normally on television shows, you jump around and you'll shoot a bunch of scenes in one room and everything. But because the set is very deep and it's full of background extras and there's all different kind of stuff going on, we shoot it as if we were just shooting a documentary. So we rehearse it as if this is that hour, and then we shoot that hour. And that's a very different way of telling a story, but it also keeps us out of love in the broom closet, because it's a work day. There isn't time within that work day, and you learn about the characters in the way that you would learn about new people that you're working with through the day. You know quite a bit about them and not very much about them all at the same time, which is a very specific way of saying this is about the medicine and about the people that we asked to do this. And I've spent hours and hours, days, overnight shifts in ERs all over the country, during research. And I can tell you that these people it's such a cliche, but these people are heroes, what they do every day. The nurses, the respiratory therapists, the doctors. It's incredible what we actually ask them to do for us. Just like police officers, the things we don't really think about, like we're asking people to do things for us that I wouldn't do. And, if we can glorify them in the way in which we tell the story, that's great.
It's very powerful. As I mentioned earlier, I understand tomorrow afternoon you're hosting a special event with our drama students that it's a screening of the finale of the Pitt.
Yeah, they get it like 2 hours early. It's very, very special.
2 hours is 2 hours. I understand you directed that particular episode as well. So, we're among friends, small group. Is there anything you want to tell us about that finale without giving away?
I won't tell you the story. It has a different pace because what we were trying to get at is even after a very busy day, doctors very infrequently, they're not on a clock where they get to leave after 12 hours.
Sure.
There's so much, one of the huge problems in medicine now is there's so much charting that's required. There's so much paperwork that's required. It's very difficult for the physicians. They spend as much time on their computers during the day trying to enter things. One of the things that AI ultimately I think is going to be very helpful with is, transferring just your voice notes into a document that you can just review and then have that's going to be something that's going to be very helpful. But so the pace changes in the last one a little bit. It's the end of the day, and we shot on the north side, right around Allegheny General, and so there are actually a few scenes that we shot that are at the end of that episode.
All right, I know everyone is looking forward to seeing the last episode.
I won't tell you what happened.
All right, that's fine. By the way, we're going to come back to AI. You can't have an event at CMU and not talk about AI. We'll come back to it. Bethany, get ready. I'm going to come to you for a question from the audience in a moment. I want to go back to your remarks. By the way, they're very powerful remarks, and I really appreciate you being so candid with us. How do you think about the audience's desire for escapism and the balance that you have to achieve with the opportunity to hold up a mirror to us, to society, and convey a meaningful message?
It still has to be entertaining. One of the things that Aaron Sorkin said always when we were doing West Wing is, we're not trying to get you to eat your vegetables. We're going to get our message through on the things that we care about by making sure you're entertained and engaged with great actors and great characters. We like to have, and it's been a bit of a problem with the streaming shows that are spread out over long periods of time, is I believe that the audience likes to have connections to their shows. In the same way that we, I don't know if everybody does this, but sharing your curated playlist is one of the most intimate, terrifying things that you can do, because it is defining something about who you are now. In the same way, the way in which you're connected to a television show and what you talk about is also connected to kind of who you are. So we're trying to draw people in to be connected to these characters, to care about them, to want to see them again, and to then mirror some of the dilemmas that we all have. They may not be identical dilemmas to what you go through, but they feel familiar. And you live out through that communal fire. You live out fears. Like, we know our parents are going to face death at some point, and we may well have to be responsible for deciding the quality of that passing, right? So I think you can tell stories about the way in which to do that, in which you face some of your own fears about it. You can see yourself reflected in those characters, and then you can talk about about how they're doing it, and what would you do if we can make people think about, like, what would they actually do? For years there's been a movement that hasn't happened in this country, that everybody is a donor and you have to opt out of being a donor, right? And there's a lot of feelings about it. I'm not going to try and force it one way or the other, but we wanted to tell something about the importance of being a donor and how you honor those people who actually make that choice, because it saves so many other lives. And so Dr. Joe Sachs at UCLA, they do what they call an honor walk when there's a donor that's being transferred to the I'm forgetting exactly what they call it, but there's a special unit in which they harvest the organs and transport them. And so what they do is they line the entire staff from the room with the family.
Wow. And
bring them down and put them into the ambulance. And so, see, I get emotional talking about it. I'm a little emotionally tied to some of the stories we do.
Sure.
But the idea with that was, it's very good for the audience. It's an emotional moment. You see it, but you also think, like,
oh, wait a second, it's not what I'm really worried about, which is my loved one who's now brain dead, no longer alive, not coming back, being carved up in some way. It's a tremendously giving thing to do, and we should honor it. So you can do that in the way in which you do your storytelling. You don't have to say, why aren't you being a donor? 500 other people will live off the skin and the cornea and, et cetera. All that can happen, but you want to tell people, here's the other side of what that terrifying thing is we have to live with, which is why we took in one of the things that's great about doing an episode that's an hour by hour, is you watch that family go through 5 hours of this decision. It wasn't like 10 minutes on screen of this decision. These decisions are difficult, and people have lots of feelings, and they have to go through things. So the format allows us to tell that story
Capture that.
in a time that feels real to you. Because we don't want people to feel as if you're going to have to make that donor decision in 10 seconds or 10 minutes, and then there's going to be a commercial break, and then you're going to come back.
Right.
That's not how it works.
And your audience is living through it.
Yeah.
And then captured. Bethany, let's go to one of the audience questions. One of the ones that you texted me related actually to the remarks that John just gave. So let's start with some of those. No pressure.
I can walk to you and you can talk into my mic.
We can repeat your question if it's.
That's why I use the lav, because that's what always happens to me. I can never get it to turn on.
All right, here we go. There you go.
Okay, Farnham, that question went to lower on my list because there's so many good questions. John,
for
we
it.
have everybody asking you questions. So this one is, how can writers, particularly those who are marginalized, best make our voices heard in a climate that continually tries to push us out of sight?
Talk about your common humanity. This is a very difficult subject to talk about, but the reality is that there is a hesitation in our current environment to tell out front stories that way. I think it's unfortunate, but it is it's a financial reality. So how do you get me to see your point of view? I'll tell a story that about something that happened to me as a writer, just as a person, as a writer. I used to travel the trains a lot. They used to have this Amtrak thing, which was like $1 or $199. You could ride the rails for like a month or something. And I ended up in a car coming back from Chicago towards Los Angeles with a guy that I made immediate assumptions about, who was a rancher. This will get to answering this question. And he was kind of the person I always hated when I was growing up, in Colorado. And I ended up, you get seated to meals, and I ended up sitting with him, and I asked him what he was doing. He said he was coming back from Chicago. He'd been there a couple of years visiting his son. And I said, oh, wow, a couple of years, that's a great visit. And he said, well, I threw my son out of the house at 15 because he told me he was gay. And I got a call, it was 20 years later, from his boyfriend lover. I don't think that marriage was yet legal, who said he's dying, and if you want to see him, you should come. And he went, and he just thought he was going to say something. He didn't know what to do, and he ended up staying 2 years and being involved with the lover, boyfriend, soulmate through his son's death. So you got to find stories that we all identify with the fear, and then tell how we're missing the humanity in the other person. It's, I often refer to it with the writers that I work with, because I work with a lot of writers who have very strong feelings, appropriate feelings about these subjects, that there are times when you want to be act up, and there are times when you want to get close to someone where you can wrap your arm around them and tell them a story that touches them. And it's a tricky, tricky proposition. I hope we'll be back in a time again when we can get stories made that are act up. But I'm being quite honest, I don't think we're at that moment. Again, sadly, it comes and goes. We had a wonderful male trans actor on
Shameless for years that we did all different kind of stories with. And I don't know if I'd be able to tell that story right now with the network people who are all the network people that I deal with are gay or lesbians or, but they're afraid. So, so we're all confronting this. How do we work through this time where there is some there's real fear? I think some of it's overblown, but that doesn't mean it's not real and it's not there.
That should have been my first question. So I'm going to go a little lighter.
Thank you.
Just for one question. Is your writer's room aware that Anthrocon, which is the furry convention, will take place in Pittsburgh over the 4th of July weekend this year?
I can tell you right now that if they aren't, they will be by the time I get back.
And just to explain the context of that, can you explain why July 4th is important?
Well, it's again from our medical professionals who we worked with. We said, what are the days that you dread? And July 4th is one of the days that every emergency room physician dreads and nurses dread because you get tons of little kids coming in with blown 2 fingers off and, so it's a crazy day. People do too much. Halloween's another one of those days.
Yeah. And the second season of The Pitt is going to focus
Takes place on 4th of July, yeah. Or it may be the 3rd of July. We haven't really decided where the best spot is. But yes, that convention's going in. I don't know.
Farnham, am I okay to ask another?
Please, yeah, ask questions. You're on a roll.
What do you think about Pittsburgh's potential in being a player in the film and TV business?
I think it's beginning to be more of one, partially because there've been so many shows shot over the last few years in New York and Los Angeles, Albuquerque, Atlanta, that just visually people are getting a little tired of it. So I think there's more conversation about it coming back. But our industry has become increasingly driven by tax support, by, rebates, all different kinds of, tax things that Georgia did and New Mexico did, Canada does. But that's all changing just day to day. We were talking earlier because I've got to show that Warner's was insistent we take to Canada until about 2 weeks ago. And they're like, don't go to Canada. Because we have a lot of people crossing the border all the time and a real fear about, what's going to happen? What kind of escalation will there be? Will we be able to get our actors back and forth? When we're trying to get actors into Canada, the Canadian Actors Union has to approve everybody who comes in. And if they're not being able to get down this way, for work, I think there's an anticipation. So they're really concerned in the industry. I got a lot of friends in the Canadian film industry and television industry, and they're really concerned that their work's going to dry up. So it affects everything you can imagine.
I want to talk a little bit about your career reflections and also about the industry. But before I go there, and I don't want to really go down too deep in the political arena, but listening to your remarks, you had some really wonderful advice for us. But how do you think we got here? With all the progress that we made, as you alluded to it, just comparing, over the course of your career, going back to your early days at Carnegie Mellon, the progress that society has made, and it's not has been a straight line, there's no question. Yeah. And this is, the progress that we have made with obviously, civil rights movement, the progress that we've made with LGBTQ movement and the community. So much progress we made in society. But again, we're finding ourselves today at a point where we're so divided as a country, as society. How do you think, what are your thoughts about this? If you don't want to answer it, I'll ask you later at dinner.
There are, none of this is original thought to me. But things swing on a pendulum. Pittsburgh is a perfect example. When I was in school here, the steel mills were still here, or they were just ending. And you had to clean off your car on Tuesday morning because they blew the coke furnaces out on Monday night and the sky was orange. and you could write your name on your car with the ash, for those of you who weren't here for that period. It was a very different town. A lot of people in globalization, we can argue about the value of it or not, got put under the bus.
Yeah.
And to believe that that wasn't ultimately going to come back, and this belief that there were no negative impacts to be had to, I come from farmers and, working class people, even though my father's a minister, my mom was a teacher, but we were, that's the world that I came from. And I've got cousins, they're, and uncles, and their lives were devastated by globalization. To assume that there wasn't going to be a larger backlash against it. And then we just have to be careful as, and I was going to talk to you guys about this tomorrow. We have to be careful in the way in which we interact with culture to be sensitive to how far you push and where, and to hear the pushback and to accept that pushback as real, whether or not you agree with that pushback, right? And to not rail against it, but to think like, okay, how should I know what I think it should be? I'm fine with this. What if you're not fine with that? What's the best way for me to convince you? And yelling at you about it isn't the best way. So it was, particularly the stuff that's happened with trans, which is a real tragedy. You could see it coming.
Yes.
All of the political advisors that I stay in touch with on West Wing, because I'm on all these threads and everything, they were all like, ugh, like a year and a half ago. Because it's too political. You can politicize things that you just want to humanize.
Right.
And politically, that can be powerful because people are genuinely afraid and they're genuinely angry that what we had as a meritocracy does not seem to be functioning in the way that it used to, right? I mean, you were talking about, this idea of how do we get not just help the students who obviously can't afford,
right,
but how do we help the students who's
middle class?
Middle class.
Yep.
Does that meritocracy still exist? I've got, people in my immediate family who believe that does not anymore exist.
Yep.
And they're angry about it, and they have every right to their anger. Right. So just in the storytelling, how do we address that and accept it and not just say, try to categorize it as backward thinking or bigotry or the fear is real. We have changed the way in which our society worked. Is what we're doing today with 104% tariffs on China, is that a good idea?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but it's an idea to try and say enough, right? We're not going to have. I come from a lot of people who were coal miners. They don't really want to go back into a mine, guys. It was rough, and there are a lot of people buried in our family cemetery up in Ben's Run that died of black lung early, right? So that's not what they want, but they want to have meaningful work.
Right.
And,
It's interesting you mentioned this. I know we're going to go down a path that I didn't think we were going to go, but we'll go on this journey for a little bit. For our audience, I mentioned to John earlier today that we made a real commitment at Carnegie Mellon to make CMU accessible for students from all socioeconomic background. Now, a family who is lucky enough to be able to send their daughter to Carnegie Mellon and pay the tuition, and the student deserves to be here, God bless, we want you here. But at the same time, we want everybody, whether it's individuals from the lowest socioeconomic tier who couldn't afford to come here unless we covered everything, to middle class kids that we were talking about who may not be able to get the scholarship that they need, to give them the option of coming to CMU versus other places that are more affordable. We made a real commitment to do this, and Jim is here, and the rest of the leadership of the university and some of our trustees are here. And CMU doesn't have the endowment of many of our peers, but we compete with all of them. So we made a real conscious decision to prioritize things. If that was important to us, then you get that done. And I was mentioning to John that we've come a long way to make CMU, because then it really represents our society. It represents essentially the profile of the society we live in, and I know that we're very proud of that. Your comment about globalization is interesting, because I think there's an element of that that's absolutely true. The globalization is part of the factor, but also the truth is that the economy has changed, and advances in technology have had an impact, and we have a number of my colleagues who do research in this area, impact on the future of work. So in the 70s or 80s, or 60s certainly, where you could have a reasonably comfortable life, that's not possible in a current economy without certain kind of skills. And the truth is that we live in a society where we're the fortunate ones. We are the beneficiary of the economy that we created. And where you're referring to some of your family members and others that you know, is that we've left a segment of our society behind. And whether it's globalization, whether it's advances technology, whether it's economic policies, all of those things have had a factor, but we've left a segment of our society behind. If we don't find a way and be very intentional about it, especially for academics, especially for those of us in our environment, find a way to bring them along, create those opportunities, then I think the kind of divisions that we were talking about
are going to continue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's go somewhere else. Let's talk a little bit about your career and reflections on your career. Who were some of your mentors in your career?
I'm at an age where some of them I've thought about it a lot because they're passing away.
Yep.
They weren't always the easiest people that I've ever worked with. But here at the school, there were several people several of the professors, a man by the name of Fred Ewens, that I put his name into one of the major characters in Shameless, who died of alcoholism on the show, because that's what happened with Fred. But he was fantastic with me and kept telling me, no, you're smarter than you think. You can do more, take more risks. Don't be safe. And he didn't mean that like go drive your car fast. He meant creatively, you're playing it too safe. Mm-hmm. Take some risks. This is the place to take those risks. This is the place to fail. Bill Nelson, of course, who I mentioned to, was, not only got me through school by finding somebody to pay my bills, thank God, but he was encouraging about this idea of how art. He encouraged us within the College of Fine Arts to explore with architecture and with the opera students, with the design students, the way in which art at that point was coming together. The technology was not as interwoven then. So how do you explore those things? And then as soon as I kind of got out into the business, I was trying to make my way. A man by the name of John Young, who is a wonderful novelist and created with Bill Broyles China Beach, hired me, I guess on a whim. I don't know exactly what he saw. I didn't give him anything that would make him think I could write it, and it was a great show and a really, really wonderful stepping stone for me that led to a man by the name of Barry Myers, who was the chair of Time Warner for a long time, but before that was an executive at Warner Brothers, who didn't fire me. It's kind of hard to explain this, but Time Warner was buying Lorimar, and they were bringing basically the entire senior staff of Lorimar over to run the company, and I was on a deal with the old regime. And Barry Meyer came into my office and says, I'm going to make you an offer today for a new deal. Take it. And I'm like, can I call my attorney or anything? And he goes, take it. Tomorrow, it won't be there. So I got the deal. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And I liked him and trusted him, and I took the deal. And so I was one of 3 people of over 400 people at the old Warner Brothers who stayed when the Lorimar executives came in and took it over. And then within a year is when I did ER. So very much so. A man by the name of Rod Holcomb, wonderful director who taught me more about directing with the camera than. And he is somebody you don't know, but he did
15 shows that you know from your youth for Cannell Productions, and did China Beach, and did ER Pilot, and any number of other things. And he just passed away the last couple of years. He told me one of my favorite sayings, which, because it seems like we need to laugh about right now. He told me, I asked him at one point what was the hardest thing about the job that he does as a director and executive producer. And he took thought for a minute and he said, well, explaining what bad taste is to people who have it.
That's a great line.
And that has proven true. And more in the micro rather than the macro.
Right.
It's like, don't take the easier choice here because the audience needs something. The audience is very smart, very video literate, very, aware of stories. So trust them was always the thing he said.
That's great.
Yeah.
What are some of the shows or films that influenced your approach to storytelling and production? Were there any that?
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of them, and they're all all over the place. But I was just, in theater, I gravitated to what we used to refer to as kitchen sink realism. The plays of, O'Neill and Anderson, and, this kind of just people talking in a room was what I gravitated to. So I gravitated to the films of people who came out of the theater. Elia Kazan, his son is a good friend of mine and a wonderful writer, like On the Waterfront. And of course he did the Streetcar Named Desire and a number of other wonderful films, but just characters, well-written characters speaking to each other. And that takes you all the way to things like, Gene Hackman died recently. One of my favorite films is Hoosiers, because it's people talking to people in a real setting, right? And I'll just tear up every time, cry at the end. It's ridiculous. And a lot of those kinds of films, and that's the television that I admired too. Stephen Bochco, who graduated from Carnegie Mellon, brought a bunch of his people into what he was doing at Hill Street and later shows. Just as good writing with good actors. And we use almost entirely theater actors in our shows for that reason.
To follow up on that, can you think of some challenges that really influenced you, some setbacks that this is particularly for benefit of our students as you think about your career?
I always try and tell people that the biggest disasters that you have are the places that you'll learn the most.
Sure.
I've been very fortunate. We've done some successful shows, but believe me, for every one of those successful shows, there's one or two or three of them that didn't work at all for various reasons. Sometimes I can blame somebody else, and sometimes they were absolutely my responsibility that they didn't work. So it's just keep trying to take some risks with what you're doing in your storytelling. Trust your audience that they're intelligent, because there is a little bit of I want to be careful how I put this. A lot of the executives and people that we work with are very intelligent, very well educated, but they've had educational backgrounds in which they've only been around people that are very intelligent. And so they assume that everybody in what is referred to as the flyover country, can't really spell and can't really put together a good sentence. And I always say, who are you talking about? I'm from West Virginia and Colorado. Let me tell you, I got, my cousin is just retired. He runs a sewage treatment plant for a Pocono resort. And he spends all of his time reading histories, like extraordinary things. And he's the most intelligent person I know. Stop assuming that, everybody else isn't as smart as you are. Assume that everybody's a little smarter than you are, and particularly in stories, because people have watched a lot, they know a lot.
Particularly at CMU, by the way.
Yeah.
Is there this is kind of a fun question. Is there a dream project that you had thought about you haven't done? It's something that you want to do that you haven't gotten around to doing it.
I wish there was, because they don't come that way.
Yeah.
They come with a writer who wanders into the room and has I was just thinking about this thing.
Yeah.
Or I just saw this thing, or there's a piece of paper about something. I have something I've tried to write like 10 times that I still haven't figured out, about an actuarial, a death actuary who's sent into a place and trying to figure out the value of a human life and realizes it has to meet the whole family and can't figure out how he can possibly figure out the value of a human life. So it's not going to support a movie or a television series, but there's a story in there somewhere. So I have a big old file of stuff on my desk, just stories, bits and pieces, editorials, things that have interesting photographs that are interesting. And usually they end up kind of running around again somehow and find a spot to drop eventually. But mostly it's just listening to other people's stories, listening to who you meet in, who you can talk to. I'm really lucky. I'm very anonymous in the sense that I can go places, people tell me stories, nobody knows that I'm stealing their life story. And that's listening, I mean, as an artist, you have to spend a lot of time listening because that's where you get away from your own preconceptions about things.
I just want to travel with you. I just want you to know this.
Yeah, I'm that irritating person who you just want to leave the room and I'm still talking to somebody. Yeah, that's true.
Bethany, is there a burning question you want to ask? Because I want to talk a little bit about, I know we're a little bit over time, but hey, this happens all the time. Is there a burning question you want to ask from, I know you got a bunch.
I do have a bunch.
Because I want to spend a couple of minutes about the entertainment industry and its evolution. Okay.
We are
ready?
going to do, what storyline did you write, direct, or produce that you are most proud of relative to its reach and influence on culture?
I tend to be kind of the proudest of the things we just did because you have to stay sort of alive in what you just did. And I try really hard to not rest on what laurels there may be because you're just, I try to stay engaged in what we're doing. So, there are just a ton of things that we've done on the Pitt this year that I'm really proud of. And hopefully there'll be a bunch more.
Are you surprised by the impact of any of them?
Always.
Can you name a few?
I try and go forward, and then I'll answer it more specifically. We try to go forward on every show with the assumption that it's going to fail, because I don't want to be thinking about what I have to do to make it successful. It is exploration, like any scientific exploration, or you're exploring. You don't know when you're going to hit something, and you don't know, but right. You have to be open to the exploration itself, to the ideas for the other writers and directors and actors, everybody you're working with. So things happen. This year for me, the biggest thing has been watching Noah Wyle, who plays the lead character. I cast him when he was 22 years old. He was a waiter in West Hollywood. And not very experienced, and looking at the monitors as I direct him and watching what he's doing in each moment now. There's a little terrifying, I kind of tell you, a little terrifying because I used to look at him on a monitor, he's 24 years old, and now I look at the monitor, he's 54 years old, and I'm like, he's a grown man, middle-aged man, and I'm like, what do I look like at this point in my life? But it's the exploration of things like single lines or moments that an individual actor will take that I didn't expect. And it happens all day long. And if you think about it as music, it's like playing music with somebody else and they do something that you didn't expect. And it's just, you're like, why didn't I think of that? And that happens all day long. And particularly lately with Noah and also with Catherine Lahasa, who plays Dana, the head nurse, who's just alive in every single moment. And half the time she's doing something that I would have never suggested she do. And it's that. Can you stay alive in this improv, this big musical jazz thing that we're doing all the time? I know that's not exactly answering the question, but it's that thing. That's why I'm not tired of what I do.
All right. I think we're going to run out of time soon, or we've already run out of time. But I want to talk a little bit about the changes you see in your industry. Over the course of your career, of course, you've seen the landscape of serialized television is changing
constantly. Yeah.
It's just really changing. And of course, from a cable monopoly, now you have streaming services and so on. Tell us a little bit about this change and tell us about
what's your perspective?
Well, it's interesting that the technology that we actually use on a day-to-day basis, the tools that we use haven't changed that much. I mean, they're much more advanced and specific, but we interact with them in pretty much the same way. Although now we're kind of on the cusp, particularly with all of the post-production facilities of actually the AI is going to, sadly, I think, actually remove a number of the technologists that have been between us and the machine, because I can now tell the machine, exactly what we want to do, and it'll make incredible changes to it. But our actual technology improves in a certain way with cameras and things like that, but not very impactful. But the industry itself has gone from when I started 4 broadcast networks and some cable channels to that people got in a cable package and paid one bill for, to an absolute free-for-all, where all of the legacy companies, the Disney and Warner Brothers, everybody, thought that Netflix was this little company that was selling DVDs in the mail, and they licensed all of their content 15, 20 years ago to them on long license fees for not much money, that then grew that company into this behemoth that then they got terrified of and tried to compete against too late. And so we went through this. There was a lot of material on. Everybody was losing billions of dollars. Netflix had the market behind it, of course, to support all of those losses. Now we're in a huge contraction because the other companies have realized, wait a second, they won that part. We want to be number 2 and number 3. Nobody else is going to be number 1. So the budgets are all coming way down. There's more attention to how we're going to get things on the air regularly to keep audiences attached, because the word that you hear constantly with what we do is churn. So the churn is the ability that everybody under the age of about 35 has to drop into a show and subscribe to the streamer for the 3 days that they plan to watch all 8 episodes, and then drop out before they have to pay anything. So, spreading things out one a week over a while at least gets people to stay there longer before they cancel, and then if you can overlap enough of them. So what you're going to see is more shows that have longer number of episodes, fewer of the kind of the world-building shows, these huge shows. Many of them are fantastic, but are spending $20, $25 million an hour because the streamer, everybody else can't afford it. Netflix has also realized we won, so we don't have to afford it anymore. So you can see there's a lot of strange, interesting product. I mean, you can watch a Danish mystery any day you want on Netflix now, and it says new, and then you get to it and you realize everybody's going, with subtitles. It's all good programming. It's so there's been this expansion. There were a lot of people who came into the business. We needed a lot of people, and now there's this huge contraction. So I'm sure you're reading business stories about how many people don't have work and, everything. But it's actually sort of, to use the horrible business term, it's kind of right-sizing back to what the market can actually support without losing $2 billion a year on your service.
You're at CMU, so we're going to have to say a couple of more words about AI. So you briefly alluded to this. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of AI on your industry? And do you have any predictions?
Well, I was president of the Writers Guild a couple of times, our union, and there's a lot of fear in the writers community that you can feed a bunch of. I mean, some of them are pretty funny because I know Aaron really well, and you can ask for an Aaron Sorkin version of Virgin River, and it'll crank one out for you, which has all of his, embarrassingly, the things that as writers we all have kind of tics and how we write things, and so it'll be all of his little things. But I think that it's the fear of it is more in the way in which it gets translated. We had a conversation the other day where we had some interest from an Eastern European country to take, I can't remember which show it was now, but one of our relatively recent shows, Animal Kingdom maybe, and to translate it into, I don't remember what it was, Polish or whatever, and just use those scripts. And I said, oh, well, that'd be great. We can get some writers to do it. And they go, oh, you don't have to. We'll just feed it into the AI. And I was like, I don't even know where to start as far as the Writers Guild Union goes for taking original works, which, writers have a right to, and turning them out. At the same time, I don't particularly enjoy, we do conform for Netflix into 75 different languages, 90 different subtitles. And so we try to look at them to make sure that their translations are actually making sense. I don't love doing that. It's really tedious. And so the sense that maybe something else could do it, but we're going to have a lot of problems in foreign with this technology because there are a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, but all over the world, who require you to dub with local actors anything that's broadcast on their networks, which provides a lot of income for the actors in those communities, and we don't need them. I mean, and then there's danger for the performers because I can change performances, and we're going to have a lot of conversations about the integrity, respecting the integrity of what your actors have done. Like I can look at a scene and it's kind of terrifying, but I can try and get the actor to smile. I've got an idea about what I want it to be, and they don't get there. I can go into the machine in post and tell it to make them smile, and you won't tell. I can open their eyes, I can close their eyes, I can, with the machine. So, but as an artist working with another artist, what's my responsibility to respect that piece of work? Sure. What's my responsibility to, I think you and I had a conversation. I saw a demonstration where, and in a weird way, it could be really useful for students here is I saw a demonstration where you could do a scene as an actor. You can put actors, you could completely create a performance out of if you've got enough material on an actor. So I could say I want to see all the films of, Humphrey Bogart and do some scenes from a show that one of the playwrights wrote. And I could have Humphrey Bogart do that scene, and I could put one of our CMU actors into the scene with Humphrey Bogart doing a scene that one of the playwrights wrote, right? The technology's there. I mean, you need a lot of computing power, but the technology's there. So what is our moral responsibility to the performances and the people that we work with to respect their boundaries? You're going to hear a lot about that in the creative community over the next few years. There's a lot. That was what a lot of the strike noise was about with AI. Was not like it was like, how are we going to use it respectfully?
Right. There are all sorts of ethical issues, policy issues that and candidly, the entertainment industry is no exception. We're seeing this in every sector of our economy. Every industry essentially is dealing with this issue, including our business, the education business. One thing that's constant across all of this is that whatever we think is going to happen, we're underestimating the impact of these emerging technologies and AI. Folks, we're out of time, but you can clap, that's fine. But John, first of all, we're so glad that you're spending this week on campus with us and with our students, and also so delighted that we've had this opportunity to have this conversation and hear from you. This has been really fascinating. I learned a lot from you, and I know that our audience has enjoyed this as well. Before we wrap up, we have two of our students who are here patiently standing by to present you with a small token of our appreciation. It's Alan Moradi, who is a senior in the John Wells directing program in the School of Drama, and Tatiana Bakari, who is a third-year MFA directing students, also a John Wells Fellow. John, given that you're a CMU alum, I mentioned that, of course, you're one of a kind, and you graduated in 1979, and that was a great year. So, Alan and Tatiana, thank you. Bring it over here. We have a director's chair for you, labeled 1979.
Oh, wow, look at that. Thank you. That's beautiful.
If you can't read it, it says John Wells, College of Fine Arts, 1979. It's yours. And it is a token of appreciation from us for you to spend the day with us today.
Thank you so much. I think TSA will let me take it as take on. What do you think?
This is, well, we can ship it to you, definitely. You guys, get in. We're going to take a
Thank you
picture
very
together. Here, come on in. We'll get a picture together. There we go. Okay, one more. I want to picture just the three of you together.
Oh, okay,
You don't
great.
need me in it. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
John, thank you again for being here.
Appreciate
Ladies and
it, everybody.
gentlemen, let's hear it for John Wells. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That's a pleasure. I enjoyed it.